Rhino, let's look at Rhino 3D. So again, Rhino 3D, if you Google that, it'll take us to Rhinoceros. Rhinoceros is the software, like the actual, the proper name. Again, you can order it online. You can also get the demo version, um, which I believe it gives you 30 days. Or no, Rhino 5, 90 days. That's new. So that's pretty long, actually. Are we here for 90 days? A little about, right? Yeah, almost. So this will almost get you through, the first sort of pass. But 90 days is definitely a long time. So I would initially download this until you figure out if you want to buy a license. You actually can download it and then buy the license and they send it to you rather than physically sending it to you. It's $195 for the student version. You don't want the whole package. You want this version right here, 195. Again, some of you have been successful to go to UIC in the past. UIC bookstore sells this, but I guess they're asking now for UIC IDs. But I think if you get there at the right time and get the right person, or act like the world's about to collapse if you don't walk away with that software in your hand. It's $95, I believe, at, and it's a physical copy, which is nice to have. The other piece of software that you're going to need is Grasshopper. So if you do Grasshopper 3D, and we'll talk about this software shortly. Um, this is the software. If you download latest version, you want Rhino 5. Okay, this is free actually. It's a free plugin. Um, and the third piece of software, which we're ultimately going to be looking at, which is not on the computers yet, but we're going to be looking at them much later, is T-splines. And what you want to do is T-splines Autodesk Education. If you Google that, it'll take you to the right location. T-splines plugin. I mean, it's sort of weird. AutoCAD makes a plugin for Rhino. Not by choice. They bought the company out who was doing T-splines. So this is free. How many people have an education version? So you can sign in. It's free to sign in. You can also you can register. So you need an education account. You come here. You give them some personal information. Actually, very limited information. The most important thing is use your .edu account. So you guys have to be using your .edu accounts, all right? And then you can just you get maybe a confirmation email through them, and then you can download T-splines. Okay, this is a plugin again for Rhino, so we will be using that later on. Okay, so let's look at, and you can see I have T-splines loaded in mine. Eventually, we're not going to be looking at that right now. So Rhino, like I've said in the past, if you know AutoCAD, you typically will get into Rhino really quickly, and I think the majority of you guys all know AutoCAD. Rhino is a command-based software. It also is a vector-based software. When I talk about vector-based softwares, we talk about software like AutoCAD, Illustrator, um, and it's much different than a software like 3ds Max or Revit, where are more object-based. Um, Rhino will allow us to basically draw using points, lines, creating then surfaces, and then multiple surfaces that produce maybe solids and so forth, right? So it is geared towards what we call nerd modeling. So it's not a polygonal modeler. It doesn't. It is not like a strong mesh modeler, although we can do mesh modeling. Um, where 3ds Max, some of you might know 3ds Max, is a heavy mesh modeler. So what does that mean? Well, Rhino was originally developed to do really complex geometry. That's why I think its main logo is this sort of rhinoceros. A rhino maybe has really complex curves as like all sort of animals do. Um, but maybe a rhino has a little bit more edge condition. Maybe they liked rhino. I don't know what the real reason behind why they called it rhino. But I imagine it's because of um, the complexity or maybe some of the softness and hardness of the animal itself. So always was primarily a sort of neural modeling, which is non-uniform rational B-spline modeler. That's what NURBS stands for. So it's really good at making complex geometries, especially doubly curved surfaces. Okay, where other software like AutoCAD are also vector based, but they're more dealing with sort of polygons. Like spline modeling or even spline drawing in AutoCAD will never be as good as in Rhino or in Illustrator, right? Like doing Bezier curves, um, for those of you that know Illustrator. So what does that mean? Well, so you guys have a little bit of history. Rhino has taken over as the 3D modeling engine um, because of its sort of ease of use, I think. Um, I can make the argument if you want a software that's easy to use, don't use SketchUp because SketchUp I think is very limited. It's easy to use, but at the same time it'll take you maybe you'll scratch the surface of modeling. Where Rhino is really easy to use. Sorry, Joe. It's yeah. SketchUp will take you so far. Rhino will take. There's no. It's a tool that allows you to do what you want to do, basically. Where other softwares to do what you want to do might be really problematic in the sense that you're fighting the software. So I think Rhino in that sense won't fight you. It might not always. It might not help you either. Um, but like software's like Revit, right? Revit's the best. When you open up Revit, you think the only thing you can make are like walls and doors and windows. You know, but you can do a lot more in Revit. Trust me, you can do a lot of the stuff that we do here in Revit, complex geometries. But to do it, you know, you have to like take the engine out, drop the transmission, and then put your head through a pinhole. So it gets really difficult. Where here, the stuff isn't so heavy, right? Um, it isn't so overwhelming. So. All right, so let's get into look at the interface. So if you go to, typically you start here. If you go to new, I told you guys just pick large object feet, which is fine. And then there it is. And we're in this sort of interface. Well, I'm going to go through some really basic commands. And I do this like with all my courses. What would be the first thing we type in AutoCAD, say? Before that even. Units. Units, right? We want to verify. I know we sort of picked units, but if we type in units, units will come up. So this is exactly just like AutoCAD. There you can see there's a command prompt, and you just type in units, and this appears, all right? So we can verify units. We can work in feet, work in modeling units. In this case, you might want to work in inches. And we can then have a distance display of feet in inches with a certain precision, and maybe we want a precision of a 16th of an inch. Okay? Now, again, I'm going to go really fast with this. You guys don't have to follow. You don't have to memorize it. I'm recording this. I think it's important to understand that you're probably not going to be able to follow me. So I think it's better like watch, maybe try some of these things. But today is going to be a little bit of just a lot of stuff thrown at you that I want you guys over the next week to really watch, okay? All right, and get used to it. All right, so that's like the first thing we can do. What's the next thing we can do? Well, again, everything is sort of, command-based, which means I can just start typing. There's a great thing in Rhino that's going to be a help. And to the right here, we have properties, layers, display. We also have a help. If this is not up, under help, we have command help. All right, so this is our command help here. And if for some reason, if it's closed and it's not there, if you go to help, command help, it'll appear. Typically, you want these things docked over here on your right. And if you have auto update, as soon as we start typing in a command, like you guys said, might want to start drawing a line appears under help. And there's even a video that shows us what it does. So if we click the video, we can see how to draw a line. Okay? And then if we scroll down, we can see all different other things that we can do with lines, different types of lines. Okay? So this command help will be your best friend. So when you're working at home and you're not working in studio or in the lab or wherever, and you can't ask your cat how to do something, um, this is going to be as good as it's going to get. Okay? Besides what you see in the video. So the other thing is, anytime we enter a command in the command line, just like AutoCAD, we have secondary commands. And then there's also information on what we can do if we want to draw a specific type of line. And there's a lot of things that we can do, and things that allow us to draw types of lines. So by default it says start of line, which is looking for a point. You can see we're in the screen. If I click once, I get a point. If I click again, I get the end point. And then you can see there's other subcommands. Just like AutoCAD, the space bar is enter. So hopefully you guys were taught to type with your left hand, right hand mouse, or vice versa if you're lefty. So you can use your thumb. And escape is canceled just like AutoCAD. So you can use your thumb to trigger the last command. And we have like both sides. What does that do? Well, that draws from both sides. We have different ways we can draw vertically. So we can draw vertically. So we're drawing vertical lines. All right. So I think it's important to understand that we enter a command and then it gets prompted. We have some options. We typically have to do what it's asking. Okay. So the biggest problem with majority people is they don't like reading for some reason. So you guys have to get used to reading again and just following directions, right? I know you guys are the people that open up the IKEA package and start putting the thing in backwards, so read the instructions, read what it's that simple, guys. And by the time you do this so often, you're not reading anymore. You know what's going to be there, right? So in the beginning, it's important to sort of get used to what's happening. The other thing that's actually different from AutoCAD, but maybe similar to 3ds Max or a software like Maya, is how we deal with viewports. Viewports here are divided into typically standard 4, and we have top, front, right, perspective. These viewports can be easily controlled and navigated with your mouse, okay? Although we do have zoom commands, just like AutoCAD, Z, enter, extends. These are just AutoCAD commands. You can see zoom, enter, extends. It zooms the extends of the view. We can use our center scroll. We can click and, not click and hold. Shift and right click is pan. Shift, right click. And then if we're in a 3D view, right click alone is 3D orbit. Shift right click is pan in 3D view. If we are in a normal view, you could just right click and it's pan. You don't need the shift. Okay? So we can do all our zooming like so, or we can do zoom window and zoom into a window, or just make a window. Okay, zoom and zoom into an area. Okay, so very similar to AutoCAD. All right. So again, workflow is very similar. We activate the windows typically by clicking on top or right or perspective, or clicking into the view. My only issue about clicking into the view is you might actually accidentally select something and then move something. That's a big problem in 3ds Max, like especially when you're trying to find something. Our scene is not that complex right now, but you can actually do that if you click in a view and not only do it. That's why it's good to sometimes toggle through the viewports by clicking on the individual highlights. Each view has different types of properties. Again, I think Revit is nowhere as complex as 3ds Max in interface-wise. In the end, all the softwares are identical, guys. The concepts are all the same. That's why I'm going to try to teach you guys, because probably by the time you guys graduate or start working, and maybe within 5 years there's going to be another package or another piece of software. And if you understand the concepts, you can switch from one package, or you're going to go work in a firm and they're going to go, Rhino, we don't use Rhino, we use X, and then you guys will be able to make that switch really easily, right? Or you'll be able to come in the office and then go, hey guys, AutoCAD, I can teach you Rhino in a couple hours, at least 2D Rhino. So everything 2D AutoCAD is pretty much 2D Rhino. There's a few commands that might not work. So anything you type in, so if we do line, if we do trim, and I pick my trim edges, extending, trimming, offset, all identical, guys. Fillet, chamfer, okay, all these commands are identical to AutoCAD in 2D. Okay, so if you guys are confident, join's actually a command they copied, so we can make a P line. That's a command Autodesk copied from Rhino. Before it was always like, to join lines in AutoCAD, it was like P-edit, M, it was like enter 1,000 commands. So AutoCAD now has join finally. So, each of them copy each other. How many people have done 3D AutoCAD? Okay, so a lot of those commands will translate ultimately. Okay, so I think, understanding again, like there's a lot of things we can do within each viewport. There's not, if we go to viewport properties, we can start looking at specifics. We know this is a parallel view because we're looking at a top view. It's not perspective. It's not 2-point. Sometimes we get weird things happening where cameras go in La La Land and we need to bring them back. So we might look at that. Eventually we start working in 3D with surfaces. We might want to look at surfaces a certain way. Grid options, we can set up grid options. I like to turn off grid. So if I type in grid and there's show grid, I can say no. I'm not a big fan of grids. I think they're just distracting. We can go to options, so tool options, or we type in options, and we'll find a lot of options here. And we'll also find options ranging from like where our files, number of undos, minimum, like all these different things that we can find. Eventually we can look at, grid snap. I mean, there's so much stuff we can get lost in here. They have something new, which is the Gumball, which I don't use really. But the Gumball is like in AutoCAD. What is this thing called in AutoCAD? Is it like active tracker? I don't know what it's called. So they have a Gumball, which allows us to pick a line and then do a lot of the transformations on that line. This is actually very similar to what we do in 3ds Max. 3ds Max has a lot of this for objects, because a lot of times in software like 3ds Max, there's not a concern of accuracy, right? It's more of a sculpting software, especially if we're doing like character animation. So 3ds Max was developed more for character animation. We're typically more interested in precision, so things like manipulating things sort of freeform aren't as critical. Another thing on viewports, we can change our sort of layout and have different sort of setups, single view. And then we can also double click on these and min-max toggle them, just like in 3ds Max. Okay? We can always customize them, change them to something else. All right? So that's sort of like tooling around in the viewports. We have the standard sort of main pull-down menus, file, where we find all our print, edit, copy, paste. There's a lot of other stuff, don't worry. Our view controls. This is like I always describing, like when you walk into, just imagine walking into a 747 cockpit, right? you might not want to start pushing buttons. So you might want to figure out what things are. And again, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to make a curve, which is a line or a polyline, or a surface or a solid? We won't be doing that much meshes, but we will eventually when we get the 3D printing. Adding dimensions, transforming things, copying, move them, rotating. Different types of tools we might use. Analyzing geometry, rendering geometry. This is a panel tool. This is going to be something we might use for paneling. This is the T-spline plugin that I've loaded. And then we have help. So this stuff is pretty much standard on all software. And I think you have to take care of what you're doing. I think eventually you guys will have an idea of what you're trying to model. So it's going to be really important to follow specific types of tools. The other thing is then we have sort of our tabs here. And a lot of this stuff is doubled, right? A lot of the things that we find here in tabs, we might find here in surface editing tools. So a lot of these things are a little bit more visual, and making solids or Boolean solids. So we have all our, the same things that are here are also here, right? So don't be shocked by it. It's just like AutoCAD, right? A lot of doubling. And the reason why these platforms are built on over time, and some, whoever's in charge of making icons and making this tab, doesn't want to get fired, I guess, so he keeps on developing them. And the person that's here trying to, hold his job and interface is keeping this alive. And then, a lot of these buttons, a lot of these tools can be pulled out. So we have toolbar layout where we can start pulling up endless tools, right? So we have our default tools. What do we want to pull up? Like, again, you guys, we can write a thesis on, digital tools if we wanted to. So don't get hung up on the tools, okay? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to make? And then which tools do we look for? And eventually, what tools do we need to make our own tools? So this is going to be important as we go forward, all right? At the bottom here, we have our sort of toggling certain things on or off, grid snap, ortho, if we want things to be planar. O snap is our object snap. These are our object snaps down here. We can disable all, turn certain ones on, endpoints. So this is when we're snapping to specific parts of an object. Smart track is when we can start snapping the things smartly. Gumball I showed you. Record history is something. How many people use 3ds Max? You guys said. So there's the modifier tab, and with the modifier tab, we can record. We sort of keep track of all the modifiers we added. Record history is something similar to where it somehow associates certain geometries to certain commands. So if we made like 2 curves and then lofted, and then changed the curve, the loft will change. Using different type of filters to filter out different types of selections. So this is a selection filter. 3ds Max actually has something similar. And then we have also our toggle through here. We can add a new layout. So there's a lot of customizing that we can do, and this has been added to sort of mimic what we might get for like paper space almost, right? So it's sort of a paper space, model space that they've added recently, which is interesting to see up here. So it's really starting to look like AutoCAD. So we start making sheet layouts even. So Rhino is a competition with AutoCAD meets 3ds Max, and the only thing it doesn't have is you cannot do animation. The other piece of software that it has as a plugin that's being developed actually by a group specifically for Rhino within Rhino is Grasshopper. So I'm opening Grasshopper right now. So if you type in Grasshopper, Grasshopper should show up. And at first it might ask you to do something very specific. And Grasshopper is an interesting sort of software. And if you looked at the website, I think when you Google Grasshopper, algorithm, sorry, algorithmic modeling for Rhino. So what is going to be Sorry, I can't even talk today. Algorithmic modeling for Rhino. You guys will see. It's where we start to use different types of parameters, um, and maybe starting to use algorithms that start to help us produce different types of geometry that might not be accessible to us as easily as doing it manually, right? Um, so we'll get into that at some point. We're going to do a little bit of this today. So algorithmic modeling for Rhino. And T-spline is going to be something a little bit different. T-spline is where we can start to use more of a mesh modeling technique and more of a sort of sculpting technique, and then translate that back to NURB surfaces that are really geometrically, um, computed. So there's a little bit more complexity and sense of smoothness. Um, so you can see model smooth organic designs in less time and fewer restrictions. So it's a software that allows us to make really complex geometries really simply, and then take those real simple tools and translate them back into Rhino. And this is happening all within Rhino. And then we're also going to be looking at, of course, scripting, which will include primarily probably Rhino scripting, and some Python scripting that we'll eventually use independent of Grasshopper and then within Grasshopper. Okay? So there's going to be a lot to cover in the next weeks. So I think I'll stop the first video right there as sort of introduction, and then we'll go on to looking at Grasshopper's interface.